Practicing manuals? Why? Hello, welcome to Shad Life, where I have over 40 years of BMX and mountain biking experience, and I like to share it with you awesome people. Today, I'm actually going to talk about this makeshift manual machine that I created. So if you saw my first video mentioning this, I did find out that the cooler works just fine, so I don't have to pull that big bench over here. All it really needs to do is keep my bike from going back and keep this stand from tipping back. It doesn't have to do much. There's not a lot of pressure on the cooler. So this is pretty cool. It works really well. My derailleur is plenty clear. I know somebody mentioned that they made a manual machine and it destroyed their derailleur. So if you do make something on your own, you need to make sure you have cutouts and clearance for both your disc brake, your derailleur, cassette, all of that. Just a warning to you. Cool. All right, so let's talk about training this way, what it does for you and what it doesn't do for you. Let's talk about what it does for you first. The first thing it does for you is it creates muscle memory, and mainly muscle memory in that balance point. And I'm going to talk about that balance point in a minute here, and about what that really means, right? And how you find that. And then the other thing it'll do is muscle development. So manual takes certain muscles and certain amount of strength also, and when I'm doing it, after a few tries, I actually start to sweat. So it is quite the workout, believe it or not. So muscle memory, muscle development, those are what it'll do for you to help you with your manuals. What it won't do for you is you won't be able to take this and then go right out to the street, pop manuals off and ride them forever or whatever. You won't be able to do the Sam Pilgrim thing, which that guy makes me jealous, man. He just pops front wheel up, blah, 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 acts like it's nothing, right? You will still need to practice out in the real world. There's a lot of other factors involved. You know, the ground isn't perfectly flat, so that affects your manual. Side crosswinds, things like that. All kinds of other factors that will affect your manual. Using the brake when you're out in the real world, when you feather the brake, it'll bring your front wheel down if you over brake, and if you don't brake enough, you'll flip back. So one of the things this can teach you is as you start to fall back, you have your finger on the brake. That's what I'll teach you, is to always have your finger on the rear brake until you are so good that you know that you're not going to flip back. But having your finger there, this can teach you as you start to fall back to get in the habit of just grabbing the brake to get your front wheel down. If you're learning, you want to be able to have that safety there. Once you get to a certain point, you can start, you know, choosing different things. But for learning, one finger on the brake brings the front end down. When it's on the trainer like this, it's not going to bring the front end down like it will in the real world. So this doesn't fully mimic the real world. All this does is keeps me from going all the way back, but it just basically locks the bike in whatever position I hold the brake, right? And then I can bring my weight forward and push the bike back down, or I can step off, or whatever I got to do at that point. Cool. So that's a lot of like intro, right? Let's get into the manual. The one thing I want to talk about is that balance point. So let's talk about that. So the balance point is this point where you lift the front of the bike, and there gets to be, like if I was to just do without me on the bike still wants to fall forward, right? So there is no point in here where the bike wants to fall back until I get about here. So the front end wants to come down. That's where my body comes into play. So when I'm on the bike, if I'm centered, the bike's going to pretty much behave naturally. It's going to want to always fall forward. As I shift my weight behind the bottom bracket and over the rear axle, so there is kind of a leverage point between the rear axle and the bottom bracket. So bottom bracket height will affect this. Higher bottom brackets tend to allow the front end to come up easier. Lower bottom brackets, harder to pull up the front end. Longer chain stays, harder to pull up the front end. And shorter chain stays, easier to pull up the front end. Those are all factors in bike geometry that will play a role in this. It also affects that balance point. If you have a shorter rear end and a higher bottom bracket, you don't have to get your weight super far back to find that balance point and get the front end up there. If you have longer chain stays or a lower bottom bracket or both, then you have to get your weight way further back to keep the front end up. We won't talk about reach and stem length and all that. Let's just focus on the fact that we're going to all be riding modern bikes, right? And pretend that that's the case. But those are the factors back here. And so the idea behind the manual is to find that balance point, which for me is generally right about here on the bike. And I'm using my body leaning back to kind of find that balance point where if I go back too far, the front end starts to go up, and if I come too far forward, the front end starts to go down, and then I shift between those 2 points to keep the front end in that sweet spot. So bigger wheels will give you more of a range versus a BMX bike with a smaller wheel. That balance point is much smaller on a BMX bike. Like, to manual on a BMX bike, you need to be in that sweet spot, which is very small. But the advantage of a BMX bike is because it's smaller wheel, smaller chain stays and everything, and higher bottom bracket, they are much easier to maneuver. So there's kind of pluses and minuses between those. All right, let's actually do a few manuals, because that's what you want to see, right? And I can kind of show you where that balance point is. We'll see how this goes, because that means I have to be actively doing it and talking at the same time. All right, let's get into it here. Couple of things for total newbies. You want to know which foot forward is your comfortable foot forward. So is it your left foot forward or your right foot forward? Everybody has a preference. There's very few people out there that are equal both sides. Me, it's right foot forward, and I think most people are right foot forward, but some people are left foot forward. The other thing is, drop your seat all the way down. If you don't have a dropper post, use an Allen wrench, lower that thing, get it out of the way for this. Now, what we want to do, once we know what pedal forward is, and then we want to be in the attack position to start. That's soft knees, soft elbows. You know, you only a slight bend in the elbows, slight bend in the knees. You want to be able to bounce a little bit. Centered on the bike, slightly ahead of the bottom bracket. So this is the position you always want to be in before you go into something technical. Whether you're going to jump, this is your preload for jumping, and then you come and pull up, right? And things like that. So for the manual, very similar to what I just did, except I'm going to pull my weight back instead of straight up, because I want to get my hips over the rear axle to keep the front end up. So here we go. Oh, not hard enough. A little harder. Oh, too hard. Okay, there we go. Now I'm in that balance point. Now watch how my hips go back and forth to keep the front wheel up. Breathing. Oh, pretty good one. Yeah. Nice. Oh, yeah. Oh, now I'm tapping the brake lever. Oh, yeah. Whew. That's a lot of work. So this is going to be work for you. One of the things is if you haven't been doing these a lot, you're not going to have the muscle development for it or the muscle memory. So I'm breathing, I'm sweating a little bit. So yeah, this is not super easy to do. It looks easy, but it isn't. All right, let's talk about this a little bit. So like I said earlier, The idea is I need to, when I lifted the bike, and it always wanted to fall forward. So the objective here is that I'm trying to get my weight to a point where the bike wants to fall back, right? And so that, you know, combined with my body on the bike and my weight being shifted over the rear axle, that's what's going to cause that to happen, because the bike isn't going to do that on its own. So you might notice that I'll dab the rear brake here and there. I try to do it lightly, as if I would do in the real world. Unless I know I'm going to fall back, then I'll just give it a good grab and lock myself into place. And then it's the hip movement, bringing your hips forward and back with soft knees. And I actually do a little bit of movement with my arms. Some people will disagree with that, but I fine tune. You notice I'll do this a little bit. I won't do this, because this isn't where the manual comes from. The manual comes from that weight shift, right? And the only thing I do with my arms is kind of fine tune the front end. Like if it starts to go forward, I'll shift my weight back a little more and I'll pull with my arms. Sometimes I'll overdo it, so it's really careful. Some people say to keep your arms in the same position. I don't know, a long time ago on my BMX bike, I just learned that I like to do those micro adjustments with my arms, and I've just always done it that way. When you're learning, maybe best to just focus on the hips and not worry about the arms, and then maybe as you gain more experience, you can get the little micro adjustments in there. I'm not 100% sure. Everybody's going to be a little different in that respect. So, but the main balance, the main thing keeping the front wheel balanced is this motion here. Like if I go way back, you can see how the fork just kind of unsprung. You can see how much lighter, just from that weight shift of my body, the front end comes up, right? So that is what's going to get the front end to come up, is that weight shift to the back. I'm not pulling with my arms. Now, if I do it hard enough and get up to that balance point, now I need to bring my hips forward to maintain it. I can't keep them all the way back, because I'll just fall backwards off the back of the bike. So I got to do that snap to get it up there initially. Then I bring them forward to counteract and get the front wheel back down. I did a little brake tap because I went a little too hard back, which is almost always how I end up going into manuals, is I sometimes have to do that little brake tap. Right there, brake tap. Now I'm in the sweet spot, balancing, brake tap. There, that was too much brake because I was going backwards. So that would have, in the real world, when I held the brake like that, that would have brought the front wheel down, but I would have needed to because I was going back. So, whew, that was a lot of work. So that's pretty much it, is you really want to focus on that, what I call the sweet spot. And for me, it, you know, is generally right about there, with my hips pretty much over the rear axle. So one thing I'm thinking here, let me get my 22-inch BMX bike down, and we'll end this video there, just to show the difference a little bit between, you know, bigger bike, suspension, small bike, no suspension. So here you go, my 22-inch BMX bike. The front end comes up way easier on this bike than it does on my 27.5 mountain bike with full suspension. I actually learned the manual on BMX bikes. So let's go ahead and do this. Again, finger on the brake, lean back, find that balance point. Notice how the front end isn't as high off the ground. Let's get into this here. Whoa. That is because I'm so used to doing it on that bike. So having the post there in the cooler is what saves me from falling on my butt. All right, try again. Whew. There we go. Too much. All right. Whew. I'm tired already. This is why I should do this a lot more, because I should develop like kind of the endurance. Okay, I'm trying to get a balance point where I don't have to use the brake. There we go. Nice. Now my finger's not even on the brake lever. Whew. Nice. This is good. Holy moly. Oh. All right. That's enough of that, but you got to see me do it on my BMX bike too. Whew. Wow, I'm sweating. It's a lot of work. Let's recap. That is a good, honest workout. Man, I just kind of discovered doing this little makeshift manual machine. I don't think I realized how much work it actually is. I've maybe been doing this for 15 minutes total. Some of it off video and some on video. Wow. Whew. Man. All right. So there you have it. The manual on the manual machine. Keep in mind, you did see me fall back. Glad the post was there. Couple of things I made sure of, because if you're gonna do this or do a makeshift thing in your house, make sure there's nothing here. Like I checked to make sure there were no nails in that post or something like that, because that would be disastrous. Make sure, you know, if you can have something a little higher, bigger than this cooler, then you can just sit down on it, something like that. So if you're just learning, you are gonna fall back. Guaranteed you're gonna fall back. So you absolutely need to have something safe back there. I have seen people take like an inner tube and mount it to something on the front wheel. I don't really like that, because then you're gonna hit the extension of that inner tube and that's gonna affect your manual, unless you can make sure that you make that so it doesn't engage until you're absolutely starting to fall back. But then by then I don't think the inner tube is gonna catch you. So I'm not a fan of something on the front, because it will, when you fall back, you'll start to feel it, and that'll actually help you keep the front end down, if that makes any sense. So I prefer find a safe way to fall back off the bike. Cool. I just want to get that safety stuff in there, because I don't want anybody getting hurt trying to do this. Finger on the brake. Get in the habit. When you start to fall back, grab that brake. And when you're first learning, give it a strong grab and either slow the fall back or stop it, and then you can shift your weight forward and drop the front end. Cool. All right, I really hope this gives you some guidance, some understanding of the manual. Once it's riding season again, I can do like an actual manual how-to video. I've done them in the past, but I'm always learning, always evolving, not only my skills, but you know, how I teach things too as I learn more. So cool. I really appreciate your support for my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.